1. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Fox RC Podcast. Me, Mike, 77. It says, go to Instagram, Fox RC Podcast, and go to make a TikTok, Fox RC Podcast.
TikTok? How do you know what a TikTok is? So that for those of you that are not fluent in Seth, that was hello, me, Seth, Mike, and Timothy Stafford.
Yep.
Go to Instagram at VOXOLOGY.com and then TikTok.
Yes.
Yes. And how do you know what TikTok is? Oh, because Hannah makes you do TikToks, huh?
Yes.
Yep, exactly. Now, Seth Theory, it's fall break.
Yes.
What did you do yesterday with Mama?
Dollywood,
ladies and gentlemen.
Whoa.
And Seth Theory, how many roller coasters do you think you rode yesterday?
Eagles.
Yep. How many?
Like 5.
Like 5?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, Seth Theory is fearless. And so he loves the bigger and scarier the roller coaster, the better.
I want to go to Dollywood. Seth, will you take me to Dollywood?
Heck no.
Heck no? What? Why not? Why would you take Tim to Dollywood?
Because it got blonde yellow hair.
Blonde yellow hair. Is it embarrass you? Is that what it is?
If I fix my hair?
Embarrassing?
No.
Would you take him if he changes his hair color?
Cut for Tim Stafford.
Cut for Tim Stafford. And Seth Theory, Seth's had a cavity filled. He's had his ears vacuumed out this week.
Ooh.
We have to go get a poke after the podcast today for hepatitis B. It's all just so much not fun for Seth. Dollywood, however, was the exception. Yep. Anything else you want to tell the VOXOLOGY community?
Yes. Hey, Tim. Hey, Duisic.
Oh, it's been a while.
Sharon, please. It's Jeff. It's on.
Nice job, buddy. I love you. He's on fire today, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
So theme song, Tim. You still have that audio file up and handy. So, Good morning to you. Happy Friday.
Yay.
We're one Friday closer to Halloween, and we just want to pause, give thanks for the baby Halloween Jesus, and all the fall festivals that will be happening in the name of Halloween without using the title. Are you okay? How are you today? Tim and I have not spoken prior to this, so Tim could be having a really bad day. I don't know.
I'm having a great day. Got up early, hung out with our mutual friend last night, had dinner. I went to an 80s trivia night, in which I took second place.
Oh, you, singular?
Well, they came with, place? And we got there, and then they're already halfway through the trivia, so we were playing catch up. And we would have won if I could. I just, for some reason, could not remember the name of the Indian burial ground in Pet Cemetery, and that would have been the thing that pushed us over the top.
Oh,
but I couldn't get it. I was just so embarrassed.
That's your genre, bro.
I know. I also didn't get Kevin. What's his name? Kevin Bacon's name from Footloose. His character's name. It's like I'll never remember that.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so it was good night. You and Shauna.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She came.
Oh, perfect.
A lot of friends there. One of our good friends hosts it, so just a fun night out on a patio doing some trivia.
There you go. Yeah. Except you choked at the end, so that's fine.
Just joked. I know.
Do you remember Trivial Pursuit? Do you remember the game?
Oh yeah.
That was
pizza
one of my,
wedges or whatever.
Little pizza wedges, absolutely. Geography, hard. Entertainment, easy. Sports, easy. Anyway, we're two Gen Xers reminiscing about a board game. It was a game where you literally wouldn't play on your phone, but you would sit around and look at people.
Well, there were no phones. The phones were plugged in the wall.
Oh, so Mike and Tim here, and we're delighted that you're with us today. We have been made fun of dramatically and sincerely for the titles of our episodes. Yesterday, we met with somebody who just episode 473, To Be Human, part 28, the new normal part 3. And it's like, yep, I can see where that's a bit hard to follow.
Maybe we should follow the Rob Bell model. His are just numbered. It comes out with no show notes and just a number usually. Maybe a quippy name that you don't understand, but he's just like, I don't care.
Oh, see. Yeah, see, he does well at mystery. Like, yes, 372 blanket. And then you're like, oh,
exactly.
well, that's, you know what I mean?
It's provocative. If you're like, what is it all about?
Yeah. If we did that, people would be like, well, it's probably an episode I can skip. So anyway, new titles are going to be forthcoming, but not today. Today we're going to do, what episode are we on?
477, I think.
477, To Be Human, episode number
20
in that series.
I don't know.
Okay.
27.
The Mark of Cain. Ooh. So let's dance. Let's dance into the fire. As
we're going right in.
Said, in a view to the. Well, listen, we've only had 2 major hurricanes hit the East Coast and all sorts of weird claims being made about FEMA and FEMA's help.
Thanks,
Yep. We've had, just incredible and incisive debates around policy issues from both sides of the campaign. So I don't know. I was trying to think of something else to talk about, but I was like, I just kind of need some more. I need more Genesis. I got a fever. So now we're gonna dip our toe into Genesis.
Merch idea with should make cowbells with Genesis written on them.
Perfect. I got a fever. So what I want to do is I want to go a little bit into chapter 4, not just a little bit, all the way into chapter 4, and because the themes that we've painstakingly developed over 476 episodes and part 27 of this here Genesis series begin to start getting fleshed out literally in the narratives, and I thought, let's spend a little time on this since we're here and since some of these ideas are relatively fresh. Genesis 4, we're going to read most of the first chapter. Adam made love to his wife Eve. Human made love to living. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain, which, from what I understand, means brought forth or acquired. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth or acquired a man. So you see the wordplay right there. I have Cain, a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel, which means vapor or mist, and he will certainly live up to that in this story. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Or the word accepted here could also mean lifted up or elevated. But if you do not do what is right, and again, the word right here is tov. If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It's the first time we come across the word sin. So we're gonna pause, maybe this episode, maybe next over that, because this is a really important, like there is, from what I understand in Jewish rabbinic hermeneutics, something called the principle of first mention. So when the word is first used in Torah, that helps set the pattern for how it will be used later. So the word sin, used here in a kind of an animated, living, crouching, devouring, animalistic sense, which is interesting, and we'll draw some implications from that. So if you do what is right, will you not be lifted up? If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Cain said to his brother Abel, Let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied, am I my brother's keeper? The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you, and you will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Now, if you've got your Genesis 1, 2, and 3 ears on, there should be things that are popping in some of the language in God's response to this. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said, not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, or for Cain, could be on or for, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, which is the word for wandering, east of Eden. All right, so that's the overview of the first part of chapter 4. Now, it's interesting because this section pulls forward a whole bunch of stuff from 2 and 3. References to the ground, to childbearing, to difficulty in conception, all that stuff. But it also begins to set up new templates for patterns that are going to recur throughout Genesis. It's the first city, it's the first murder, it's the first sibling rivalry. All right, so we want to go through that. So I just read the story, or the part that we're going to try to look at today. And we may not get through it because there's plenty of stuff to discuss. But it begins, and we didn't read the second part, but it begins with Adam and Eve making love, and it ends, the chapter 4 ends with Adam and Eve making love. And it's interesting how those two birth stories show Eve kind of developing as a character in the narrative. So the first story is the one we already read. Now, the human, Adam, knew his wife Eve. She conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I have created a man, and again, it's a form of the word Cain again, with Yahweh. I have created a man with Yahweh. Now this, bro, and so much of my Hebrew insights are, given to or credited to Tim Mackey, at least in this section in Genesis. He has some really fantastic stuff. I double check most of the time, but I mean, good Lord. So I'm not a Hebrew. No one will be shocked to discover I'm not a Hebrew scholar. And I mispronounce everything, but it's interesting here. I have created a man with Yahweh. Now that with Yahweh could mean several different things. With Yahweh could mean, there are 3, I think, different ways this has been interpreted. With Yahweh could mean with the help of Yahweh. I created a man with Yahweh, with his help. And that's kind of how we want to read it naturally. And that's how our English version sort of presents it. But it doesn't make sense when you look at the second birth reading that we'll look at in just a second. Another way to read this, older translations will have, I have created a man, namely Yahweh. As if the woman were thinking that she was promised to give, she was promised that she would give birth to a seed, a he who will crush the serpent's head. And so I've given birth to Yahweh. I've given birth to a spiritual being, the promised seed crusher. But grammatically, that doesn't make a lot of sense. There are scholars who point out that the word with in Hebrew can also mean alongside of or in comparison with something. So I created a man with Yahweh, meaning Yahweh created a man, and I also created a man alongside Yahweh. And that better fits her sentence structure. I created a man, not a child, interestingly enough, a man
Yeah.
with Yahweh. Yahweh created a man, and look, I've created a man too. This actually best fits the context that she's, again, it's another example of a human being gifted something, but then kind of seeing themselves as the controller or possessor of it, so that they rip the gift away from God's character and nature and instead use it to bolster their own autonomy and self-sufficiency. Right? We see that many times throughout the story. And I kind of am partial to that interpretation, that I created a man just like Yahweh created a man. And created, again, is made up from the letter of Cain's name. So it's all a big wordplay, which is fascinating. Now, that was the first. I created a man with Yahweh. The second one, the second birth story involving Eve, is at the end of chapter 4. And Adam knew his wife again. She gave birth to a son and named him Seth, because, and Seth means appointed, because God has Sethed me, another seed in place of Abel. So she named him Cain because she created the man in the first example. And it said, I created a man with Yahweh. Here, she names him Seth because God has Sethed me, appointed me, granted me, gifted me another seed in the place of Abel, for Cain has killed him. So it's interesting that chapter 4, you have these bookend birth stories. And then in the middle of chapter 4, you have Cain knowing his wife and giving birth. So the end of chapter 3 is all about a seed that will come. It's the seed of the serpent, or the seed of the woman. And we're still trying to flesh out what exactly that means. Is that physical lineage, or is that something bigger? And it's going to be both, of course, as we've already hinted at. But it's interesting that the woman seems to go from, I created a man in comparison with Yahweh, to God has given or granted or appointed me a child, a seed.
Yeah. She lived a lot of life in between the two.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's one of those things that, unless you're really reading carefully, you just don't pay much attention to. It's just like, yeah, you just skip right over it. But she's almost, and they're reflected in the lines of the two kids. The Cain line becomes the autonomous, self-sufficient, sinful line. And the Seth line becomes the gracious, faithful, like almost God-fearing line. And so it's even in the way, this almost comes from the way that Eve receives each of these children. It's almost set up, their destinies are almost set up by their naming and Eve's posture towards them. It's just fascinating stuff. So many layers to it, right? Always. And we're not at all surprised there are layers. Now, that's the Eve, Adam, and here's the birth of Cain and Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks. Cain worked the soil. Now, and Mackie does a great job making this point. But when I think of flocks and soil working, farming, I think those are both examples of rural living, right? You're out in the countryside, away from the city. Mackie points out that farming was considered an urban profession because you would need people close by for the infrastructure that would support crops and buy them. And so what we're getting in that first sentence of Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil is that Abel is a shepherd and Cain is an ancient urbanite. And you know, I mean, one of the things that as you go through and you look at the early chapters of Genesis and how they view cities, and the early chapters of Genesis and how they view shepherds, like it's two entirely different viewpoints, right? Abraham was a shepherd called out of the city of Babylon, right? Isaac and Jacob and their many sons were all shepherds. Moses meets Yahweh in the desert of Sinai while shepherding his father-in-law's flock. Yahweh shepherds the people of Israel out of Egypt and into freedom. Israel's first true king, David, of course, was a shepherd. And then Yahweh himself is a shepherd for God's people, and Jesus picks that image up when he calls himself the good shepherd. And so there is a deep, like, theology of, yeah. So Abel was a shepherd, and this is the first instance we get of someone shepherding. Cain was a farmer who worked the ground, and according to Genesis 3, the ground is cursed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then cities, man, I mean, think about cities. Cain, it's interesting. Cain, and we'll explore this more, Cain is destined to be a wanderer, but instead of wandering, he builds a city, which is totally fascinating. Then we meet a guy named Nimrod who creates the city of Babylon. Then Lot is associated with the city of Sodom. And then Pharaoh, of course, is associated with the great cities of Egypt. And each of those cities have an instance where they create a situation where blood is crying out from the ground and God comes to judge, right? It's like, so the cities create blood for the ground almost, whereas the shepherds are examples of how God himself leads his people. So again, not that we don't know that yet if you're just reading the story for the first time, but that's kind of what it's setting up, because the big question is, how in the world, why does God receive Abel's offering with favor and Cain's offering, he does not receive with favor? And notice the text doesn't say he receives it with disfavor. Cain isn't rejected here. It's that one offering was pleasing to the Lord and the other one wasn't. It's not that God looks at Cain and says, you yourself are worthless. It's no. And because God pursues him and dialogues with him when Cain is upset that his offering is not looked upon with the same favor that Abel's offering was looked upon. And the one hint we get is that, okay, one of them's a farmer and one of them's a shepherd. And that means then that the farmer brings produce. Right? And it says he brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering. That's what Cain brought. While Abel, the shepherd, brought an offering too, but we're told two specific things: the fat portions of some of the firstborn. Now, as we're going to see in Leviticus, the fat portions are the best portions, and the firstborn are the most important, symbolically, of the flock. And so already we've distinguished Cain's gift from Abel's. Abel's gift was as a shepherd. Abel's gift was firstborn, and then not only the firstborn, but the best parts of the firstborn, the fat portions. Whereas with Cain, he is a city-ish worker, maybe not at this point. Again, there I don't think there were. We're not talking about big cities, but it's more urban than rural. And he just brings some fruit. And again, this is, I mean, so we're not sure if the offerings are connected to their character at this point, or is it just simply a matter of vocation, or is it that Abel brought the best and Cain brought some? Right. No idea. And there are all sorts of, obviously, years and years and years of speculations around that. And so when it says that God looks with favor upon Abel and not upon Cain, it's not God rejecting Cain. I think that's a really important point to make. Just because my kids give me two presents, one of them is something I've wanted for a long time that they know is valuable, and another one is the world's best dad coffee cup. And I look with one gift with favor and the other one with disfavor. It doesn't mean I approve of one over the other, right? In terms of my children and how I value them or love them, but rather one gift was more special than the other gift is kind of, I think, the idea. But Cain doesn't read the situation that way. He gets angry and downcast. And what's fascinating is that God, like he does with the parents, God seeks after Cain, right? The first thing God does is he pursues Cain and asks questions. It's the same thing God did with the human and the living one, the Adam and the Eve, right? He asks questions. Where are you? So here, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is tov, right, good, will you not be lifted up? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at. And my NIV text has your door, which really preloads the meaning of the door here. But in Hebrew, it just means the door. Sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. And we've looked at that, several times. A couple of things here. When God approaches Cain, the invitation is, Cain, you don't have to be downcast. If you do what is right, will you not also be lifted up? Will I also not look upon your gift with favor? Like, it's a choice again between tov or ra, right? Good or evil. Right now, in your anger and jealousy, you are considering ra, evil. But if you do tov, will you not also be lifted up? And the implication is, hey, this isn't a permanent situation. There's still time. This isn't like, there's still time to fix this. If you've ever been in a relationship and you get to that tipping point where there's been anger and frustration, but it hasn't gotten nasty, like, you can come back from that, right? If you do what is right, you will also be lifted up. But there's another person that seeks, or another being or another entity that seeks to take advantage of the fact that you're angry, downcast, jealous. And that's one he calls the croucher, sin, who is crouching like an animal at the door, which is so interesting. When it says your door, it sounds like, oh, it's the door of his heart. Sin is crouching at the door of your heart, Cain. The problem is the door of your heart isn't that's never used anywhere. The door of your heart. That's not an Old Testament phrase. And so literally it just means, like, at the door, sin is a croucher. And so you're like, at the door, sin is a croucher, not your door. So your door makes it metaphorical. Sin is crouching at the door of your heart. Nope. This is a very concrete Hebrew image. At the door. So what's the door? Now, Mackie and loads of other people suggest that this is the door back into the garden. Remember, let me flesh this out just a little bit. Remember that Eden is a much bigger region than the garden. So God created Eden in the midst of the land, and then in the midst of Eden, there was the garden.
It's a little Russian packing doll.
It is exactly what that is. And so what God shuts off is the way into the garden, where the tangible presence of Yahweh and spiritual beings overlapped with a part of the earth and the land. And so there's a door there that Genesis 3 doesn't identify as a door. It just says it closed the way to Eden and put angels there with flaming swords. But I think there's a good case to be made that there is a door that is the way back into Eden, and it would make sense that is where they would bring the offerings, right? If they were exiled from the garden, they would still be in Eden, and so you can imagine there are two angels there with swords. Where else would you bring an offering?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there were two angels there with swords, but you get what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
it would make sense narratively that they're trying to go back into the garden. And because the garden is where God tangibly is dwelling, that's where they would bring the offerings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what's interesting is that when we get to the tabernacle and the temple, there's a curtain there that separates the holy place from the most holy place. And you know what that's called? The door. So I don't know. It's so all right. Any thoughts so far, my dear?
Oh, it's just a lot. I'm trying to pick apart the themes that you've already tried to reestablish over the past few episodes. So, yeah, no, keep going.
Okay, bro.
Well, there's a lot there. I think that you hit on some of the big things that we grew up with like the door to your heart. Like, what are it's like we pick and choose 3 or 4 words out of like 9 verses, and then build an entire theology off of that. So it's just interesting going back through it this way, piece by piece, where you're like, oh, this narratively makes a lot of sense. And I think it's important to say that God like you said, does go after, right? Like this idea of rejection actually being like, your gift just wasn't favorable, but not saying I reject your gift and sends him out of the land.
Right.
It's how Cain responds to it, which I think is interesting for how we respond to things.
Yes.
So that stuff is interesting.
That's a really big deal. God is not rejecting Cain.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that he looks upon one with favor and the other one he looks upon with disfavor. It just says he only looked upon favor with on one of them.
Yeah.
And then he pursues Cain and says, you can still be lifted up, but this downcastness, and we hear downcast and it's depression, but it's anger.
Yeah, I hear shoegaze.
Yeah, exactly.
But that and so I'm trying to hold on to with stuff we've talked about with Old Testament violence, that we've talked about with accommodation, that we've talked about with Mackey's suboptimal lens.
Yes.
And so, and the idea that you kind of established with the garden being that we were not created as eternal beings, but had a chance at that.
Yes.
And what sin does, but that those are not punishments. So it's like I'm trying to keep all these threads going forward, because like you said, like our theology starts in Genesis 3, and instead we're like, no, let's put anchors in Genesis 1 and 2, and then as we go through all this kind of stuff out of the garden, that God is still pursuing, but he's doing it through the suboptimal.
That's right.
For whatever reason, that's always the problem of evil, right? Is why and how in the first place. But
you do it but yes and no. Like, we do it with our kids all the time and call it good.
It's right. Like, so I'm trying to keep that the God is, every time all the things we wrestled with growing up that nobody had answers for, or they would make up really terrible answers for about God's violence or just the violence that was happening, to see where it started and then how he is being faithful to a narrative that he established with them.
That's right.
But so I think Cain is a good example of that, because the way that Cain reacts is almost how we have read the scripture in the first place. How we've read the scripture onto God is how Cain reacts. So it's like we've taken Cain's attributes and put them onto God almost, and then have gotten angry at why God is the way he is. It's like, no. God was saying, hey, like, I'm worried about you. Where are you? Why are you angry? Like,
Yeah. You have a really big choice to make, and it's the choice between life and death, same as your parents.
Yep.
But there's another being involved here, just like with your parents. I mean, we'll see there are parallels to this story that are ridiculous. So we'll get to those.
I had parallels this morning.
I mean, ooh.
Just with
Now,
all this
Cain,
the school board stuff, like we're literally seeing people play out fear mongering and the different things. And as you're talking, I'm just like, none of this is, we have not left any of this behind. We've only built upon it. So it's really interesting to try to find our way through it.
And I think that's why Genesis has such enduring relevance. And part of the reason why I'm a Christian as opposed to anything else is that there's a universality to some of this that I just can't get away from. You know what I mean? It just like the biblical story for me has so much explanatory power in answering the big questions about why things are the way they are. And it's certainly not because God intended, right? God, the whole time, God is like the dude picking up the horse and elephant poo at the end of a circus parade. You know, it's like, I've got a beautiful design for this parade.
More like the elephant and the donkey poop.
Yeah, whatever it is. Well, I see what you did there.
You smell what I'm stepping in?
I do.
But real quick too, like I lost it. Never mind. Something you just said made me think of something else. Yeah, I don't know.
It'll come back, and when it does, interrupt. And whoever does the drinking game when you interrupt will
You're welcome.
Have a good morning. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. Again, to Cain's place of business. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And it's interesting, brother here is repeated 7 times in this little story. And as we learn from Genesis, that's a big number. The Lord goes to Cain, and again, it's the same question. Where are you? He asks in Genesis 3. Right. Where are you? He knows. Again, this is a figure of speech. It's the same question. Where is your brother Abel? I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Now, the entire rest of the Old Testament is an answer to that question in the affirmative. To love your neighbor as yourself means I am my brother and neighbor's keeper. Which is so fascinating. And then Paul says that sums up the entire law. So Cain is almost like the first example of anti-Torah. You know, and it's just profound. So much of the rest of the Torah is, yes, you belong to your neighbor and your brother and your enemy. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord, of course, says, listen. Or he says, what have you done? Again, similar question to his parents. Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the what? From the ground. Now, we have been told the ground is such a major feature of the first 3 chapters of Genesis, right? They're made from the dust of the ground. They're invited to work the ground and cultivate it. The ground is cursed, right? So now murder, bloodshed, does something to the ground, and it almost activates the ground so that the ground itself is crying out for justice, which is, and this, you know, there's a deep theology in Paul where it culminates with him saying, hey, all of creation groans in anticipation of the redemption of the sons of God, us, where like the curse of the ground, like we're intimately tied to the ground. And that's why creation, one of the many reasons why creation like matters environmentally is as the ground goes, so go we. And as we go, so goes the ground. There's this deep, like ontological connection between the ground and the humans that we see for the first time here. The ground actually cries out when it opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Now then notice what God says. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You've been a farmer. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. And this is a Mackey insight. Restless wanderer are the letters of Eden scrambled.
Okay.
Right. That's total Mackey. Like I would never have picked up on that. But it's fascinating because this is the wandering is the anti-Eden, right? It's just how many layers, Tim? How many?
Too many.
It's just, I mean, as an English prof and as like a pastor. Oh, I'm sorry, Sethi. Sethi said, please stop yelling. I'm excited, Sethi. Stop my dadgum yelling, Sethi just said.
Don't forget he's the appointed one.
Yes, bro. We actually named him for that reason. What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. So you see how central the ground is there. Mm-hmm. Your brother's blood cries out from it. You are driven from it. So your farming was a stable occupation, right? You worked the same land over and over and over again. Now you're to be a restless wanderer. And the two words there combined to form Eden in a scrambled way. I mean, it's just like, come on. Cain said, my punishment
the words restless wanderer are the ones that scramble into Eden, or?
Yes, they it's the letters of Eden scrambled. It's like the opposite of Eden. It's exile.
Okay.
So Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. Now, again, this is just a little hint, like they were at the door of the garden here when he's seeing this. I will be a restless wanderer. There's that phrase again. On the earth, whoever finds me will kill me. Now notice, this is the firstborn of Adam and Eve, but who else is out there? Obviously, he's saying, if you exile me, there are people that are going to kill me. Well, are those his brothers and sisters? I mean, you don't get that from the story. No, people already existed when all of this was happening. So Cain is worried that he will be without the protection of a tribe, of a family. And then the Lord said, and this is so interesting. This is the beginning of a motif where God will give a sign, both as judgment and as a sign of rescue. So not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Now, 7 times over doesn't mean God's going to kill him 7 times. It means that they will experience the totality of punishment. There will not be 1 ounce of what they deserve withheld. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain or for Cain. And there are all sorts of wild and crazy guesses as to what this mark was. But we don't know. So that no one who found him would kill him. Again, assuming that there are people already out there. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, which is the land of wandering, east of Eden. So now they were kicked out. His parents were kicked out of the garden. Now he's out of the region called Eden. All right? Makes sense so far. Mm-hmm. Now notice the sign given to Cain is a sign both of judgment, you will be a restless wanderer, and of mercy, but I will allow no one to kill you. And that begins, of course, a motif that continues like with the rainbow. Here is a sign of judgment and mercy. Or Rahab's, the red cord hanging down from Rahab's window, a sign of the judgment against the Canaanites, the living in Jericho, but also of the mercy to Rahab and her family. Right? Circumcision, the fact that Abraham failed, but that God would be faithful to his line. Like signs become, like baptism. What is baptism? It's the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus now pictured in and for us, right? A sign of mercy and judgment. So the sign of Cain becomes something that God will do again and again and again for his people. It's a sign that reminds them of both judgment and mercy.
So you're saying it wasn't painting him a different color?
No, although there are some ancient commenters who have said it was leprosy. God struck him with leprosy so that people wouldn't come near him, or assigned a wild beast to him to protect him.
If it was like leprosy, that would be kind of the judgment and the mercy. Like there's the judgment, right. You get this terrible disease, the mercy. No one's going to kill you because they don't want to come near you.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the idea of the blood crying out, becomes so interesting. And you mentioned violence earlier, like they were supposed to fill the earth. And there's this great line in Genesis 6, after the Nephilim episode, which we'll talk more about. The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Right? So the violent motif that starts here is in Eden, but now it's going to spread throughout the entire earth. So when God says, fill the earth with my glory, the implication is with my glory. Now it's the earth is filled instead with violence.
Yeah.
And it's violence that causes God to unleash the flood.
Well, it's interesting too when you think about like what it means to take care of the land, right? Like water and soil, and instead, watering it with blood and the blood of your brother. And the way that creation reacts is not, it's almost like creation is like, it doesn't have the free will or the cognition that we have. It just kind of exists as this thing that knows who God is. Does that make there's nothing that's persuading it? So its reaction to the blood, well, there's no like the land isn't going to go evil or good in that sense. It's just like it is the land, but it reacts. It's like has a very honest reaction, like the blood going into its mouth and it cries out. And it's like this really interesting. It's not like it's pontificating over whether the blood was shed in a just way or not. It just knows that it's not right, and so it cries out. Does that make sense? Like it's a really interesting image of like where we were supposed to be with this, and then where we ended up, and how the land actually reacts to it. And it's hard not to see that in modern weather problems or whatever, but like it's just a really fascinating response that the earth is just, because I talk to my students, like I've always been afraid of the ocean or in awe of the ocean. Like I never really learned how to swim. When I go, and I've gone surfing, when I'm out there, I'm terrified because if a wave barrels on you, you don't get to call timeout and the water just stops. No one unplugs it. It just keeps going because that's what it does. And it's not because it's malicious towards you. It's just how it is. And so the land crying out is such an honest, innocent response to something that is like malformed or should not be happening. Or at least that's how I feel when I hear that. It's like, especially with people who are working like these agrarian, like working the land jobs. And then there's one way to do that in which something is fostered, where life is fostered. And then there's this other thing, and the land is like, no, this is wrong. I can't like sit with this almost like I'm crying out because of this.
Yes.
And then when Paul comments on that, you can just feel that lineage of groaning or lamenting alongside the things that humanity has chosen to do.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Which also makes it interesting for sin crouching at the door of the garden, if that's what it is. Right. Also kind of is interesting in that, like this. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I think that's such a big point. I really do. And the thing that is so interesting to me is the ground. Like, you think the act is private. Cain takes Abel out into the field, away
to be alone
from everybody.
Yeah.
And he thinks that there are no witnesses. And that's why it's so interesting. Like when Yahweh stands before Israel in Deuteronomy and calls them into covenant relationship, I give you this day life or death, Tova Ra. And he says, I will call heaven and earth as witnesses against you.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Like it is. There is a very unbiased observer to the sin and transgression of human history.
You said that so much better. An unbiased observer.
Yeah.
It took me like 4 paragraphs to get to that statement.
No. And not only an observer, but there are consequences for the observer. You know what I mean? It's
an innocent bystander in a weird way.
Yes. Yeah. Who then gets condemned alongside the perpetrator.
Which
because
is
now
also
the
fascinating.
ground,
Yeah.
totally. And that's one of so many parallels between the choice given to the man and the woman and the
Yep.
choice given to Cain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm gonna hit these quick and we'll wrap it here. But then there's a really big point to make. We'll make next episode about sin, and what sin does. But just notice the parallels, right? So Adam and Eve are given a choice about good,
Mm-hmm.
right? From any tree of the garden you may eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you may not eat. So they're invited to do good, and good was not eating from the tree of good and evil, of the knowledge of good and evil. With Cain, Yahweh said, if you do good, will you not be lifted up? So both choices involve choosing what is good versus what is not good. Second parallel. The humans are tempted by, quote, an animal, right? The snake in Genesis 3 was crafty. Now we hear about sin crouching at the door and its desires to control or to master you. Third parallel. The human, of course, gives in with destructive consequences. The woman took. She saw and she took. Cain was angry, and while they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel, his brother. Now, notice the rise up language. Why is your face downcast? If you do good, will you not be lifted up? Cain rose up and struck down his brother. Just all of that wordplay is so glorious. Another parallel. God responds to each of them with a leading question. Adam and Eve, where are you? And to Cain, where is your brother? The human dodges the question. Adam says, well, it's the woman who you set with me. She gave to me and I ate. And then, Cain says, well, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?
Such a sarcastic response.
Oh, good Lord, yes. There is a cursing that comes after each of these episodes, right? To the serpent, you are cursed. And here, Cain, you are cursed from the ground. From the ground. Not the ground is cursed from you, but you are cursed from the ground. Like, I can only imagine the farmers who have lived through droughts or, locusts or blight, and it feels like they are cursed from the ground. Like anything they do, the ground will not cooperate with. Notice in both instances, there's inverted desire. Your desire will be for your husband. He will rule over you. And notice sin's desire is for you. You must rule over it. Working the ground will now be more difficult in each situation, right? The ground is cursed in Genesis 3, and the ground is cursed. You can no longer work the ground in Genesis 4. And then there's a banishment from the divine presence in each story. Right? In the Adam and Eve story, they're banished from the garden, and now he is banished from Eden. And so, I mean, and I hope, without visually seeing these, there are like 8 or 9 parallels that you just could not flesh out and intensify. The sin of the parents now has been cast down to another generation, and they're embodying and intensifying the sin they did, that they saw their parents do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, what does it mean to be human? It means to have ingrained inclinations toward that kind of autonomy, self-sufficiency, and proclivity to violence if we're not careful. That's what it means, And the word for that is the word sin.
Yeah.
You could not have, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like you could have a more thematically correct origin story for the nature of human violence than this one.
Yeah.
There's jealousy over God's favor and God's approval. There's murder that was thought to be done in secret. The ground is affected. And it's interesting, Cain is named a restless wanderer, but then in the next verses, we'll see he founds a city. So the city for him, and this sets up a whole template, the cities are places where humans try to recreate Eden. And that's what the Tower of Babel is, right? It's Babylon, and it's not so that we would go up to the gods, it's so the gods would come down.
As hard as we try. It's very fascinating. The fear mongering, and then this is what I meant by this morning, that with the campaign stuff here, we've had like the opposing folks are starting to like really get angry and threatening. And so I was talking with my friend who's running this morning. I was just like, look, these are not personal attacks. This is a result of not being able to campaign on ideas, but to campaign on what you're against in anger and fear. And we're seeing so often how that stuff's not rooted in, it's rooted in this idea, like Cain wanted something and then didn't get what he wanted and reacted to that, like fear of whether it's rejection or fear of necessity or fear of like things being taken from you or whatever. And then you can see how we still build on those same, like instead of reaching down or we were talking about the Matthew thing, the turn the other cheek. And it's like, because part of it was like people were so riled up and angry and like, should we respond in kind to these threats? And I was like, let's just all just take a breath for a second, because we have an opportunity to resist, but not doing so with the same type of posture as the attacks that are coming against us. We have a chance to do it in love, resist in love. And you just see that theme as we just keep rolling over and over through humanity of like choosing violence, choosing whatever, but it's always out of a fear of what the other is going to take from you. Like what you, not always, but a lot of the time it's rooted in that idea. And you can just see that with Cain, like has one idea, that idea doesn't hit and reacts against his own brother. And then everything else groans out alongside it. It's just, it's sad to read these things and just see it being played out on a daily scale, however many thousands of years later. It's just, what have we learned? Not a lot.
No,
we've made bigger clubs to hit each other with.
That's it. We can just do more mayhem, to a greater degree. Yeah,
but just such a profound invitation to. I just feel bad how watered down the gospel got over the last few decades or however long, because there is such a bigger, inclusive, intentional, invitational thing happening here for everybody that we've instead like made a ticket price for. So that we can have some importance to it, or that we can monitor how it happens, or
man, I don't know. It's gone from a sense of, man, I've got it right. I'm the one that has the truth. I'm the, privileged superior one, to like sin being less about my individual transgressions and more about the fact that I live and breathe and contribute and am victimized by a whole mode of life that is anti-Eden, anti-Shalom, anti-Yahweh. And I'm invited to abandon that mode of human life and to pick up an entirely other mode of human life that's the in Christ
scarcity, the myth of, or is it the myth of scarcity, or
yes, the scarcity,
sin of scarcity.
And fear mongering. And I mean, it's all the things you're talking about, all the things that our politicians, our unhealthy politicians run on. If these people get power, you're going to be hurt. There's not enough to go around. And so we have to hold on to what we've got, protect it.
We've got the backstage passes.
Yeah. It's just the serpent hasn't had to deviate much from the script. I sit in a garden full of yeses, but I'm always focused on the one no, or the one thing 100%. That's not there, or whatever.
Yeah, that's become part of our DNA. And as you've been going through these chapters, the idea of the accuser is so hard to not see on every page of just
Totally.
what better way to create fear and division and animosity and fear of scarcity and all these things than accusing in very specific ways that it just makes a lot of sense.
And the greatest trick the accuser pulls is convincing Christians that God is the one who's the accuser.
Yeah. And then what does Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan.
That's it, right? So if God's voice sounds like the accusing voice, now God speaks truth. There is conviction, but conviction is so different from accusation, you know?
Oh yeah.
And so I've, it's taken me a long time to learn to appreciate the difference between accusation and like conviction, or what Paul calls godly sorrow and worldly sorrow.
Yeah. Accusation, you don't need a lot of like depth or proof for often. But
no,
and that seems to be such a theme in all the Bible is like, this just takes a little bit more of your intentional like energy to be a part of. Like, this isn't just memorize this one verse and then run with it. It's you're being invited to a whole new posturing. So it's not just, you don't get to make blanket statements. You have to live your statements.
Come on now. That's good, bro. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've survived yet another podcast. Oh, and with unerring accuracy.
The appointed has
Seth
felt
Erie
a movement in the
senses the
force.
close.
Yes.
Yes. What do you want to do, bro?
First, let's do some first episode we can be you.
We're going to do both blessings?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to do the Shema first.
Yep.
Are you ready?
Yes. Shema
Israel, Adonai Elonehu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Amen.
That your turn.
My turn?
Yes.
All right. We used to do this every episode. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you. And in these days, may he give us peace. Stack and chat your chairs is something we say at church, not on the podcast.
You could do it.
Guys,
you never know.
We have an Etsy store. Check it out. See you later.
Bye.